Moving on to discuss Thomas Aquinas, he's very much the product of the period he was brought up in and these new changes that had occurred. He was born in northern Italy in 1225 and brought up by one of the new orders, that's the Benedictines, but went on to become a Dominican, slightly more radical order despite his family's best efforts to dissuade him. Some of his family's efforts included keeping him under house arrest for 2 years and placing a prostitute in the cell in the hope that he'd succumb to temptation, but Aquinas preferred his books and learning over the pleasures of the flesh and ended up becoming a Dominican student and then a lecturer in the University of Paris, studying Aristotle and theology. At the time that Aquinas was working, the disputational method of teaching was very popular in universities, and this didn't lead to very quick arguments. It meant that students argued and debated over a point for a considerable length of time, and this method would go on to influence Aquinas' work. He'd start by stating the strongest arguments he could think of against a point, and then systematically disprove them. Naturally, this method didn't lead to very short works, and his masterworks, the Summa Contra Gentiles at 300,000 words, and the Summa Theologiae at 2 million words, that's over 4 times the length of the War and Peace, are very, very long. At the age of 50, Aquinas had a religious experience. We don't know exactly what it was, it might have been a stroke or something, and it meant that in light of all that he'd written before, he considered that all to be straw, because he'd truly seen the divine, and he died shortly afterwards. It was thanks to a miracle involving herrings which miraculously appeared in his salted fish that he was given shortly before he died, well miles from the sea, that he was canonized. Writing 8 million words in defense of the faith wasn't enough, but finding herrings in your fish was, and during the late 1800s he went on to become the official theologian of the Roman Catholic Church for about 100 years. Now, I suppose that given he was an official church philosopher and his biggest impact you could consider to be on ethics, it's worth having a look at his ethics. In terms of ethics, he believed that all acts fell into 3 categories. There were good acts, bad acts, and acts that were indifferent. We talked about Abelard and Abelard's emphasis on intention, and Aquinas also put weight on intention, but unlike Abelard, he didn't give sole primacy to intention alone. He believed that you didn't need both a good intention and a good action to make a good act. Intention alone was not enough. Aquinas was also a big fan of Aristotle and wrote many commentaries on the Greek philosopher. Much like Aristotle, he believed that what was good was what was virtuous. He had 4 cardinal virtues of prudence, temperance, justice and fortitude, but in addition to these he added 3 further theological virtues of faith, love and charity. And it's interesting to note that these 3 further theological virtues, these Christian virtues, differ from Aristotle's. Aristotle's ethics, which are called the Nicomachean ethics, are very much based on aristocratic Greek values of self-control, of being nice to your neighbour but not necessarily being generous to the poor or anything. And so this partly shows the shift that had occurred since Rome became Christian and the classical world passed away. In addition, the ultimate purpose of Aquinas' virtues was different, in that they were there to give knowledge of the divine, not simply to enable you to lead a good life. But of course this discussion about virtues is all rather abstract, and I assume that you want to know what Aquinas' most influential idea in the modern day is. And it's not the every sperm is sacred line that's parodied in Monty Python. It's probably in fact his idea of natural law. This is the idea that human laws should reflect the will of God and the laws of nature. And of course, because the laws of nature, such as gravity, or the fact that the sun is going to rise, are universal, then this means that we should have universal human laws, and this has inspired much of human rights legislation, especially after the horrors of the Second World War. So now we have human rights legislation in place to prevent things such as genocide and slavery, which all over the world it's generally believed these are bad things. It was also this idea of natural law that led to him writing about when it was just to make war. So his views was that it was only just to make war between princes, that today would be state actors, so he would presumably be against terrorists, and only when rights had been violated, and only to avoid evil. so you couldn't have an aggressive expansionist war. And these ideas, at least theoretically, underpin the international legal order in the world in which we live today, and so he has a great influence down to this day.